day, grade 8 learners! Here's another fun time to learn English 8 over Tele-Eskwela. I'm your teacher, Ma'am Joy Diaz of Kawayan City. Be with me, and you will never be the same again. Be smarter, be more confident, and be more driven as you enrich yourself with the worldwide language. Come on! Grab your module, paper and pen, so you could get your sweet portion of our session. This week's competency is on how to use modal verbs, modal nouns, and modal adverbs appropriately. Specifically for this session, you are expected to be acquainted with modal verbs and how they are used in sentences, perform exercises on modal verbs, and process ideas in sentences using modal verbs. Imagine, just with this session, you will be loaded with invaluable learning at the comfort of your homes. Let's have your first step through a recap of last week's lesson. Read each of the following situations in writing a bibliography. Write A if it is acceptable and NA if it is not acceptable. Write your answers on your paper. Number 1. A learner can get information from various websites and acknowledge the author by writing the sources used. I repeat, a learner can get information from various websites and acknowledge the author by writing the sources used. Number 2. A learner may not cite sources of information that he or she used in his or her research. I repeat, a learner may not cite sources of information that he or she used in his or her research. Number 3. A research paper requisitely contains a bibliography written on a separate page and placed at the end part of the paper. I repeat, a research paper requisitely contains bibliography written on a separate page and placed at the end part of the paper. Number 4. It is important to cite the sources of information that you used in your research because it will give credit to the author. I repeat, it is important to cite the sources of information that you used in your research because it will give credit to the author. And number 5, in writing a bibliography, it is a necessity to use appropriate punctuations. I repeat, in writing a bibliography, it is a necessity to use appropriate punctuations. Let me flash the correct answers. Check them against yours. All of them are letter A, except number 2. I repeat, all of them are letter A, except number 2. If you got them all, that's awesome! It would mean you have got the right attitude in acknowledging sources in your researches. As a prize, I'm going to add more to your English knowledge. Being observant will lead you there. Did you notice the highlighted words in the previous review? They are can, may, requisitely, will, and necessity. What do you think are these words? You're correct in your idea. They are called modals. They bring us now to our main topic, modals. But of course, we will focus only on modal verbs. As you get acquainted with the modal verbs, you will realize how important they are in expressing our ideas. Take a look at the following dialogue. Pamela and Donna talk about the news on the restrictions of going outside because of the pandemic. Find out in their conversation if they both agreed which announcement shows a stronger obligation. Hi, Donna. Have you heard the good news?
Yes, Pamela, I have heard about it.
Donna, if I were to make an announcement, which do you think shows a stronger obligation? Is all persons below 21 years old must stay at home during enhanced quarantine? Or all persons below 21 years old might stay at home during enhanced community quarantine?
I think the statement, all persons below 21 years old must stay at home during enhanced community quarantine, shows a stronger obligation.
Oh yes, that's what I also think, Donna. Do you also agree that the statement, all persons below 21 years old must stay at home during enhanced community quarantine, shows a stronger obligation than the other statement? That's right, class. Pamela and Donna are correct in their judgment which statement expresses a stronger obligation. Notice the underlined words in the two statements, may and might. What do you think are these words? These words are examples of modal verbs. Wow! Imagine, we came to know that we could express ourselves by the use of modal verbs. Let's deepen your learning about modal verbs and their functions. Read and examine the sentences below. Number 1 sentence. His 75-year-old mother is too old to ride a horse. Again, his 75-year-old mother is too old to ride a horse. Number 2 sentence. His 75-year-old mother might be too old to ride a horse. Again, his 75-year-old mother might be too old to ride a horse. What have you noticed in sentences 1 and 2? Do they have the same meaning? If not, what is their difference? Sentences 1 and 2 have different meanings. Sentence 1 states a fact that his mother is too old for horseback riding. Sentence number 2 expresses the possibility that his mother could no longer do a horseback riding due to her age. The presence of the word might in sentence 2 makes the meaning different. The word might is an example of a modal expression that functions as a verb. Aside from might, there are other commonly used modal expressions that function as a verb, like may, can, could, shall, should, will, and would. Modal verbs are auxiliary or helping verbs which modify or change the meaning of the main verbs. You use modal verbs in giving advice or suggestions, in making requests, or in giving predictions and prohibitions. To show more of the other uses of modal verbs, here is a list with sample sentences. If you are really certain, use the modal verbs will, shall, must, won't, will not, shan't, shall not, can't, or cannot. Sample sentence, I must be a winner over this pandemic. If you are very likely, then the modal verbs to be used are should and ought to. The sample sentence is, learners should finish all modules. If you mean possibility, use the modal verbs may, might, or could. Sample sentence, parents could be the best tutors these days. If it is for strong obligation, the modal verbs are must, have to, or need to. The sample sentence is, we must rise early every morning for our classes. But if you mean weak obligation, the modal verbs are should or ought to. The sample sentence is, everybody should follow health protocol. If you mean no obligation, the modal verbs to be used are needn't, need not, don't need to, do not need to, don't have to, and do not have to. The sample sentence is, celebrations do not need to be so extravagant. But if you mean permission, the modal verbs are can, may, could, and might. The sample sentence is, may I be your study buddy? If you mean no permission, the modal verbs are can, cannot, may not, and must not. The sample sentence is, the family may not have the reunion. If you mean to offer, the modal verb to be used are will or shall. The sample sentence is, Ben will make your cake. If you mean request, the modal verbs are will, would, or could. And the sample sentence is, could you sing for me? But if you mean promise, the modal verb is will. The sample sentence is, this will come to pass. But if you mean decision, another is will. The sample sentence is, I will do better this year. If you mean advice and suggestion, the modal verbs to be used are shall, should, shouldn't, or should not. The sample sentence is, you should do your best in your studies. If you mean to express ability, the modal verbs are can or could. The sample sentence is, she can be the best cook. But if you mean the general truth, the modal verbs to be used are can or may. The sample sentence is, we may fight COVID-19 with a strong cooperation. Having been acquainted with the modal verbs and how they may be used in sentences, you must be ready now for a deeper experience with them. Do you know that we don't use these modal verbs only in verbal speaking? We may express them even in our things. Exciting, isn't it? Let's go! I'm sure you have your so-loved t-shirt in your cabinets. Do you know that your shirt may express the modal verbs? Take a look at this and let's read together. Could you open the door for me? I can play any musical instrument. You must follow me. May I go now? I will eat now. So you see, you may use the modal verbs even in your things. Which printed shirt expresses obligation, ability, permission, request, or willingness? Determine the function of the highlighted modal verb expressed in the shirt prints. Write the letter of your answer on your paper. Number 1. Could you open the door for me? A. Offer. B. Permission. C. Promise. Or D. Request. I repeat. Could you open the door for me? A. Offer. B. Permission. C. Promise. Or D. Request. Number 2. I will eat now. A. Ability. B. Decision. C. Permission. Or D. Promise. I repeat. I will eat now. A. Ability. B. Decision. C. Permission. Or D. Promise. Number 3. May I go now? A. Decision. B. Offer. C. Permission. Or D. Request. I repeat. May I go now? A. Decision. B. Offer. C. Permission. Or D. Request. Number 4. I can play any musical instrument. A. Ability. B. General truth. C. Offer. Or D. Promise. I repeat. I can play any musical instrument. A. Ability. B. General truth. C. Offer. Or D. Promise. Number 5. You must follow the doctor's advice. A. No obligation. B. Permission. C. Strong obligation. Or D. Weak obligation. I repeat. You must follow the doctor's advice. A. No obligation. B. Permission. C. Strong obligation. Or D. Weak obligation. And let me give you now the answer of the exercise. For number 1, it's a request. Letter D. For number 2, it's a decision. Letter B. Number 3, it's a permission. Letter C. Number 4, it's an ability. Letter A. And number 5 is strong obligation. Letter C. Did you get them all correct, grade 8? I hope so. I believe in you. You must have realized the wonder of modal verbs. Through them, we could express our different ideas. You must really memorize them so you may use them. Let's have your final shot in the world of modal verbs. You'll have it in the presence of our twin visitors, Ina and Isa. Listen to their conversation. As you listen, list down every modal verb they use. Hi, Ina!
Hello, Isa.
Do we really have to wear our face mask whenever we go out?
Of course, Isa. We might get the deadly virus anytime, so we shouldn't take any chances.
You are right, Ina. We can take any chances of getting sick.
We should always wear a face mask and wash our hands to protect us.
Were you able to list down the modal verbs, class? Let me show you a list of them. They are have to, might, shouldn't, can't, and should. I repeat, have to, might, shouldn't, can't, and should. Wow! You had a perfect list. Now, I'm pretty sure you're excited in using these modal verbs in your daily conversations. And you can't wait starting now. But please, Wait for a while. Before we say goodbye, please be reminded of Isa and Ina's conversation. Always be safe with your masks all the time. There you had it, grade 8. It was a fun adventure with the modal verbs. This is Teacher Joy in your English 8 Telescuela session. God bless you!